Wrestling with God, episode number 11.
Oh, I turn my headphones up, man. Take off your Bluetooth. We about to take it past the roof. Wrestling with God to find the truth. It's so mind-blowing and the facts are bulletproof. Tune in and connect direct, cause this sets demand respect. We ain't even tripping, the most intriguing podcast on iTunes. Flow with the word like a balloon. Oh, yeah.
Welcome back, and thank you for once again tuning into the Wrestling with God podcast. I am your host, Scott Blair, and we have a very exciting interview for you today. But before we get into that interview, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for making this podcast what I never imagined it could be, because you guys have taken the time to share it on your social media, to go and leave ratings on iTunes, and you subscribe to it. It has just been unbelievable, the things that are happening with it. Of course, I've said it before that we were number one on iTunes, new and noteworthy, for a lot of our first couple months. We've continued to stay in the What's Hot section of iTunes nonstop. But I was taking a closer look at the stats this week, and because last month we broke over 5,000 downloads, and it made me really curious about who was really listening to the podcast. And so I began to look into our host providers' feedback. I looked at the global map they provide for downloads. In fact, I'm looking at it right now. And whenever someone downloads from a country, it becomes a shade of blue. And by appearance, it looks like the podcast has been downloaded in almost every country on the planet. The whole map is almost blue. Now, looks can be deceiving, because if you get some downloads in large places like the U.S., Canada, Brazil, Mexico, India, Russia, China that I'm looking at, then that colors most of the map. But digging a little deeper, it appears by numbers that we have downloads in like 80-some countries. And there's something like, 190-some countries in the world. So I believe the podcast has reached about half of the countries in the world. We have listeners in countries that I know nothing about on the other side of the world, like Namibia and Burkina Faso. And Lord, I don't even know if I'm saying the names right. But I'm so deeply grateful that we are getting downloads everywhere, and in Islamic nations and war-torn nations and communist nations and nations where the gospel is still illegal and people are being persecuted for believing in Christ there. We've got hundreds of downloads in China alone, and these humbling facts have really fanned the fire for me in making sure that the content in the Wrestling with God podcast represents the body of Christ with our best effort. And if you haven't yet, would you please share this podcast via social media? Tweet it, Facebook it, however you want. Even if you had, share it again. And again, the very best thing you could do for us is to leave us a hopefully 5-star rating and a comment. Don't forget to comment on the iTunes review. And that allows all of the ministries represented on this podcast to get the global exposure they deserve. Thank you again so much from the bottom of my heart. I am so grateful, so humbled, and I honestly just don't have the words. If you are a mixed martial arts fan, if you are a veteran, if you are a soldier, if you are a church planner, what else? If you hate cystic fibrosis, I mean, this podcast today is going to be for everybody. So if you have breath in your body, you are going to enjoy this interview. I guarantee it. And I won't keep you any longer from it, Grapplers Church fam. Let's grab a hold of God and not let go. You may have already seen our guest today via New York Times, NBC's Nightline, or The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. A self-proclaimed scrapper since childhood, Pastor John Renken now has over 68 professional mixed martial arts and boxing matches under his belt, many first-place titles spanning 3 different continents. He is a veteran of the Pride Fighting Championships in Japan, my all-time favorite sporting event, bar none. I believe he fought Akira Shoji in that bout. Is that correct?
That is right.
All right. For those who don't recall that, or you're probably too young to remember, in 1994, this former Satanist found Christ, graduated from North Central University in 2000 with a degree in Bible and theology. Then he accepted his calling to develop unique ministry by using his knowledge of MMA to lead others to Christ. In 2000, Pastor Renken planted Extreme Ministries and started his business, Clarksville MMA Academy, of which he is the head instructor. Pastor, we are so stoked to have you today. Are you ready to wrestle with God?
I am ready. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Hey, before we get started, if there's anything that maybe I left out of that introduction that you'd like our audience to know about you, about your family, about your work, your ministry, go ahead and feel free to let us inside a little deeper into who you are and what you got going on.
Sure. One of the things that I do that, for whatever reason, when they wrote up my bio, never put on there, is I'm the head instructor here at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, where I train the U.S. Army and combatives. So I take all the skills that I've learned through years of fighting professionally in MMA and boxing and kickboxing, and I take those skills and I train. Roughly, we have 36,000 soldiers here at Fort Campbell, and I'm responsible for training them, coaching them when they go to tournaments, setting up tournaments for them to fight at, all the various aspects of combat when it deals with one-on-one stuff. So I do the stick and knife stuff with them, boxing, kickboxing, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, takedowns, all that stuff. And we actually have our own version of MMA. It's not quite MMA. There's no elbows and no knees to the head allowed, no twisting leg locks. But I take them and I set up these tournaments for them, or I take them to other posts that are doing these tournaments, and our soldiers get to actually try their skills in the kind of preparation stages before they go to combat. So they're going to get to test themselves against other soldiers who are training from all across the United States and abroad. Some of the other things that are pretty noteworthy: in 2009, I resigned from Extreme, turned the reins over to Pastor Carlos Serrano, who has actually just recently changed the name to Grace Life Church. He's doing a great job. Love that guy. Love what they're doing. And then have kind of been floating here and there. Stepped in to kind of help a church that was in trouble, which was at the time called Willow Bend, that we changed their name and kind of updated some things to Freedom Church. And just recently, they have merged with another larger church, and they're doing some great things as well. So kind of right now, I'm not in what most people would call full-time ministry, but I kind of think that the stuff I do with soldiers is full-time ministry. So
you're a veteran yourself, are you not?
Yes, I served from 1993 to 1996 here at Fort Campbell. Did Airborne School, Ranger School, a bunch of other, smaller schools that aren't as noteworthy. Airborne School, Air Assault, those type of things. So yeah, I'm a veteran too.
Well, thank you for serving our country, sir, and thank you for the continued work with our troops. Hopefully you're providing them some tools that will keep them safe and bring them home. Have you ever had a story like that? As a soldier ever came back and said, John, man, what you gave me saved my life on the field. I came back to my family because of what I learned here at class with you.
Actually, I've had more than just a few. Here at Fort Campbell, we have over 250 documented cases where soldiers have had to use the skills that I've taught them in combat. One of the first ones was in 2001. A gentleman entered a room quite by accident by himself. There were 6 bad guys in the room. One of those bad guys hit him over the shoulder with a 2x4, broke his collarbone. And in the process of doing that, he ended up having to fight. There were 4 remaining guys in hand-to-hand. He shot those 2 and ended up combative, saved his life.
Wow. I know you probably receive compensation for doing that training, but I guarantee that no check anybody could write you can feel better or bring more pride and joy than a story like that.
Yeah, I've lost quite a few friends over the last couple of years, and to have a friend come home is a good thing. And it's definitely worth more than the paycheck. The unit I work for has been amazing to me. I wake up in the morning, I thank God every morning for the men that I work with because they're phenomenal people. And it's really rewarding when they come home safe and said, hey, man, that stuff you showed me saved my rear end.
Hey, man, that's awesome. Hey, I don't know if I know you won't remember this, but I'll just throw it out there anyways. But probably in the early 2000s, I actually visited your school and trained with you. You were hosting a seminar at the time, Eric Paulson.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. I thought that was.
We were at a high school, right? I was
think
out of high
so.
school.
I think so. I remember the wrestling match. Yeah.
I remember you being there, but
Yeah, I knew you would. It was the only time we probably met in person. I was a youth pastor at a pretty large church in Ohio at the time, and of course a big MMA fan and jiu-jitsu student, kickboxing student, and stuff. And we had traded a couple emails, and but when I found out about the seminar, I ran down there on the weekend just to do it. I still got pictures of Eric and I from that seminar, but I don't have the pictures. I haven't been able to find them of you and I from that seminar. If I find it, I'll send it to you, and maybe that'll jog your memory.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'll tell you, because of Eric is such a phenomenal teacher, that whole weekend is blurred because he taught so much stuff. It's just like, oh my God, I can't even think. And I still keep in touch with Eric. He's a great guy. He's a great teacher. I love having him involved in anything I do.
Yeah, I totally agree. I remember leaving there and saying that it was a crime that I didn't videotape it, because his progression from every angle and move, and the chicken wings and the knee bars, there were just so many. Every time he told you one good one, then he modified it and it became different or better. And I got so excited about that one, I forgot the previous one. And I learned 100 things, but I remembered 90 or 2 of the 100 things and forgot the other 98.
I definitely record now whenever I go anywhere Eric is, because you won't remember it otherwise.
Absolutely. Why don't we start at the very beginning? I guess my first question is going to be, after going through the bio, is how does a Satanist find Christ?
I would probably argue that I didn't find him. He found me. So I wasn't, so in 1993, I joined the Army, and I joined the Army for a specific reason, which was that I wanted to kill somebody. And that was my kind of goal. And when I got into the Army, my squad leader, my eventual squad leader, was a born-again Christian, has been very influential in my life all the way up until recent years. Great relationship. And, through the process of talking with him as he mentored me in the Army and was a great squad leader for me, we began to argue about religion. We began to talk about the claims of Christ. And one morning, I was getting ready to leave for Ranger School, and in the process of that, he walked up to me and he said, this might sound a little crazy, but I believe that God spoke to me, and that if you don't give your life to him, you're going to die. I was like, whoa, you must be one of those Appalachian, snake charming guys. And I was like, get away from me. I don't want nothing else to do with you type thing. And I walked back up to my barracks and I sat down. I was going back through my packing list to make sure I didn't miss anything, because in Ranger School, if you don't have your gear with you, they'll send you back home. You fail. So I wanted to make sure I wasn't a guy who lost out on that opportunity because I didn't pay attention to my packing list. So as I was going through that packing list, I was sitting on my couch, and I just felt like God spoke to me, man. I can't explain it any other way. And, I know there's tons of people out there with theological positions of God doesn't speak anymore. But I don't have any other way to explain it. I was sitting there on my couch. I just felt God come down from heaven and say, you will die today if you don't give your life to me. And, man, I was crying, and I don't cry even now. I'm not really that big of a crier. And man, I couldn't tell you what was wrong with me. And I walked back downstairs and I was like, hey man, what do I got to do to get saved? And, he was like, all right, man, hey, look, I get it. You don't believe, he thought I was teasing him, like making fun of him. I was like, no, I'm like really serious. What do we got to do to fix this thing? And so he came back upstairs with me and we prayed, and man, it was just the most life-altering thing that had ever happened. And, and I wasn't looking for him. So I say that Christ found me. It wasn't the other way around.
When you say former Satanist, what does that include? Were you involved in an actual cult, or you were just a twisted kid who owned a satanic Bible, wanted to kill someone? Or
yeah, so in I think it was 66. I don't have it in front of me anymore. It's not readily available information in my brain. But the Church of Satan and the Temple of Set had a church split over the actual deity of Satan. Is he a real person, or is it just our human nature? The Temple of Set.
Hang on. You're telling me that Satanists too have church splits?
Yeah, I think it's pretty common in religion at large. Okay. Regardless of which one you're a part of.
They have denominations and.
Yep. And so they had a split over the idea of, is Satan real or is it just our human nature? The Church of Satan decided that it was more of our human nature. The Temple of Set said, no, he's a real being, and they split. I think it was 66 or something like that. And so I went with the Temple of Set. As I started getting into the occult, I found out about the Temple of Set. I started pursuing the Temple of Set. I became a full-fledged member of the Temple of Set and was beginning to work through the degrees in the Temple of Set. So I was like a card-carrying Satanist.
And we have Protestant churches that split over the same theology of whether evil is nature or actually Satan.
Yep.
So I think a lot of people, hearing the introduction that I gave of you also, would probably at first glance, not knowing you, think that you were a Satanist and a MMA fighter who then found Christ. But that's not the case, is it? You became a Christian and then became an MMA fighter?
That's correct. So when I got out of the Army, I began to pursue full-time MMA while I was going to Bible college. I had not ever fought before I became a Christian. Like I was into martial arts and did martial arts tournaments, but I had never done MMA or any full contact stuff like that. And so when I got out and started going to Bible college, I had my first professional fight. Still find it online. It's called the Cold House Fights. It was in the winter in Wisconsin in an abandoned house. And I fought my way literally through Bible college, used the money I made from fighting to help pay the bill, because it wasn't cheap. And so I actually was a Satanist, got saved, then became an MMA fighter.
That's great. So I'm sure you get this. I've listened to a few of your interviews, read some different things that you've done, and I know this is an all too common question, but people are going to ask it, and it's what we got to start with. So what about those, especially here in the body of Christ, that can't wrap their brain around it? They say that this is violence, that it's human cockfighting, it's too violent. How can you be in a pulpit and in a cage and so on? What has been your response over the years to that accusation?
What's funny is this question has been asked of me since 1996. It just was when the New York Times article came out that I really had to write a response to it. So here's what I say to everybody. First is that MMA is a sport. Whether you agree that it's a sport or not, it doesn't matter. It's a sport. And we don't have a problem to anyone playing football. We don't have a problem with anybody playing hockey. I mean, even in churches, we joke about, hey, I went to a hockey game, or I went to how's it go? I went to a hockey game and a fight broke out, or however they say that. And it's okay to play hockey and fight in hockey. So what's the difference between hockey and MMA? So the first thing I try to really impress upon them is that we don't make these kind of distinctions with football. Imagine, Joel Steen or some of these other really popular preachers out there, Mark Driscoll, if they got up on Sunday morning and said, hey, I've heard from the Lord, you can no longer be a Christian and participate in any way, shape, or form with football. What would the response across the country be like?
It'd empty out churches, I'm sure.
It would empty out churches probably, which really is a poor expression of our devotion to Christ.
Yes.
But that's a conversation for another day. And so we don't make these kind of distinctions with other sports. So why would we with MMA? My second thing is that I really base it on the word violence. The word violence actually means to violate someone, to go against someone's will and to do harm to them, whether that be through purse snatching, or raping or mugging or barroom brawl. So by the very definition of the word, MMA is not violent. It's two men or now two women, because now women MMA is legal, but two men, two women that get in a ring, have agreed on mutual terms that we're going to come in here, we're going to scuff it up, we're going to find out who the best person is. So by the mere definition of the word violence, this does not meet. So that's one of the other things I use. So a lot of people then will ask me about, well, what about Jesus when he says turn the other cheek? And I'm probably a little bit different in this, in that I have a very strict interpretation of turn the other cheek. If you came and you began to literally beat me up because I'm a believer, because I love Jesus, and then you started to violate me, my response as a Christian is to turn the other cheek. Now, if you came and you were going to rob me just to steal my wallet, my response is going to be a right hand to your head. You're not taking my wallet. And in the kingdom of God, I think that we have failed to understand that there are things that happen in this world because we're agents of the kingdom of God. And then there are things that happen in this world because of the evil and the fallenness of this world. And we have to be sensitive to the Spirit to understand which one we're in. Is this because I'm a Christian, or is this just because of the evilness of the world? And so when using this idea of turning the other cheek, I talk to people all the time about, so if your sister and you were walking down the street, or your girlfriend or your wife, and somebody jumps out of the bushes and is going to rape your significant other, is the response to turn the other cheek? Most people would say, no way. So I ask them, well, what's the difference? Why does that change your response on turn the other cheek? And really, it's a cultural thing. It's not a biblical thing at all. And Jesus, when he's talking about turn the other cheek, is actually talking about people who are persecuting us because of our religion, because we follow him. If they would read the entire passage, they would see that Jesus is in context talking about that you are being persecuted, you are being violated because you follow him. Man, if it's not about following him, I'm going to scrap. You're not going to take my wallet. You're not going to hurt my wife. You're not going to hurt my children, And I'm a very, like I said, I'm a very strict Bible student, and I try to do as best as I can interpret things in the context of the passage. And I just kind of think that pacifism and that wussified Christianity is not what Jesus is talking about. So, however, if it's for the kingdom, I'll be the first to tell you, the response is you let him persecute you.
Agreed. I graduated from a Christian high school, and I actually wrote my senior paper on that very topic. Is there a place for violence in the Christians' lives and society, or self-defense, those type of things? And much of the same theology and argument that you used is what I put in my paper. So I agree probably 100% with what you were just saying. And going back to what you're saying about the football and everything, I agree 100% with that as well, that, it is a sport. And I think that I would dare to say, and I guess we could do some research on it, that the toll of the violence, if you want to use that word, of a football player on their body and their brain and their health is a much heavier toll than would be on an MMA fighter.
Well, actually, that's already been done, and yes, it is. There are far greater injuries, both in numbers as well as in seriousness in football than in MMA. And there was actually a study done by Oxford University in England that showed that the number one most dangerous sport in the world is not boxing or MMA. Speaking about injuries, head trauma, those type of things. And I bet you $1,000 you probably couldn't guess what it is unless you read the paper.
Is it football?
Nope. Soccer.
I wouldn't know. Is it really?
Soccer produces the most head traumas out of any sport in the world because of all the headshots. They were talking about in that article that the average collegiate/professional soccer player will do 500,000 headshots per X amount of time. And over the course of time, that leads to more brain damage than any other sport in the world.
That's a hard sell just because of boxing. Because you got to think about sparring, how many hundreds per sparring session, per match, per week, per month of shots you take to the head with that padding. That's why we talk about the violence of MMA versus even boxing. I would much rather take one or two clean shots from the little MMA glove from somebody and be done than to have to take the 300 or 400 some of these guys take in 10 rounds with 12 ounces on.
Yeah, but I think that, there's definitely I think that boxing was the second or the third in that study. And there's definitely significant evidence to show that MMA is actually safer on the head than boxing, because the bottom line is that you take way more headshots in boxing. So that is in there. But in soccer, they actually take more than in a boxing bout.
Wow.
And I'm looking it up right now to see what the average amount of headshots in professional boxing is. I want to say it's about 200 shots to the head. Might be a little bit more than that, but they only fight once or twice a year. And I'm trying to remember. At one time, I knew what this was as far as numbers, but I can't remember what it is now. So
it's not that high for Mayweather.
Yeah, it's not that boy can move, man. It is not high for him.
It sure can make you miss.
Yeah. There's some. when you've been boxing for that many years and had that many people throwing punches at your head, you almost develop a secondary sense there to get out of the way. So, and I can't remember what that is, but I do remember that it's not as high as what people would think. Okay. I mean, it's still pretty high, but
well, if we find it, we can put it in the show notes later, or any of those studies or something. Maybe we can trade them via email, and I'll add them in the show notes and put those up for people to see if they're curious about it. I think probably from a distance, people who aren't familiar with MMA, don't know its place among believers, would probably think that you allowing that into your life, into your church, into your ministry, etc., for them would be extremely liberal in thinking. When you are, let's say, in the pulpit, if they came and sat in your church, had no idea that you were an MMA fighter, you ran an MMA gym, anything like that, and they listened to you preach, would they find your theology liberal or emergent, or do you think it's more fundamental, mainline?
Yeah, so I am definitely not emergent. I am definitely not fundamental either. I have a kind of a different definition of those than probably what's standard. But for the most part, if anybody listened to any of my preaching, that they would say I'm orthodox. I'm pretty straight and narrow. I'm not fundamentalist in the sense of legalism or what most people commonly know as fundamentalism, which is the preacher tends to be the authority in the house and things like that, and I'm definitely not emergent. I believe the scriptures are inspired by God. I think they mean what they mean, and all the stuff that goes on to try to kind of make them say something different than what they say is not really, where I'm at.
Okay. I think a common misconception is that a lot of people might see this as maybe, how would I say this, some type of ministry gimmick. I know because of it's part of my life as well. So I understand it's really just an extension of who you are. And of course, wherever you go, Christ should bleed over into that. So I see it more like, you're taking Christ into the arenas that you're passionate about, no matter what type of work or hobby that is. Not setting up a freak show to try to attract people who otherwise might not be exposed to church. Which is how some people would see it. So in other words, it's just you taking Christ into your circle of influence, and it's not a marketing gimmick to try to trick the world into coming to church.
No, as a matter of fact, for me, MMA has nothing to do with church. It happens to be who I am, and if I get to talk to you about Jesus, or the opportunity opens up to where I can share my faith and how it's made a difference in my life, then I do. But MMA is who I am and what I love to do, and it's the way God made me. So, when that New York Times article came out, there were a lot of people that were talking about the gimmick of it. And now they were not a gimmick, but my church actually did throw MMA fights. But it wasn't billed as Christians fighting Christians or Christians fighting non-Christians. It was just because I'm an MMA guy, so we threw MMA fights, and it was a great way to advertise for the church. And, I use this as a pretty good analogy, but the one card that we did literally before, I believe it was the second time we went into Iraq after 2003. And we had about 1,000, 1,200 people there. And as we began to open up the fight card, I said, hey, listen, I know a lot of you guys are getting ready to deploy back to Iraq for the second time. And if you wouldn't mind, I would like to pray for you guys. And, if you want me to pray for you, if you want to be included in this, if I could just have you stand to your feet, I'm just going to pray God's blessing over your life, that you'll return safely to your family, and that our mission will be accomplished. And out of the 1,000 people, there were probably 800 people that stood to their feet. And I got to pray over those guys. And I got to pray for their safety, and I got to pray for their families. And that's not a gimmick, man. That's just me being me. And I can see how some people see that as a gimmick. But at the end of the day, if we're missional, it's just about us being Christ wherever we go and using whatever he's given us, whatever he's put in our hands, to reach those people who don't know him. So if that's a gimmick, well, I guess I'm a circus show.
Yeah, I definitely just wanted to point that out because I don't see that with you. I had a mentor of mine who said we've got everything from bodybuilders to belly dancers in the pulpit to try to attract people for Christ, because really we've lost the power. We've lost the love. We've lost a lot of things. But I think what you got going on, John, is not that. It's not a gimmick. It's not a marketing ploy. It's just, like we said, you taking Christ into just basically your circle of influence. So there's a lot of people now, though, that are trying to start ministries that revolve around MMA. You are the pioneer of that type of ministry in my mind. So what is key for pastors, trainers, fighters who maybe want to have their faith impact the MMA culture? What starting advice would you give them?
The number one thing I would tell people, regardless if we're talking about MMA, boxing, hockey, football, is be real. Don't do it because you think it's a way to reach somebody. Do it because it's who you are. So regardless if you're going to be an MMA chaplain or if you're going to be a fighting preacher, or if you're going to be a church planner who fights, whatever the story is, I don't care. You just got to be real because people will smell the crap before you ever get there. So if it's fake, they're going to know it's fake. And, for me, everything I do is about being who I am first and foremost. I got to be loyal to who I am and how God made me. And then out of that, if I'm real and if I'm who I say I am, I will reach the people that God puts in my life and that God wants me to reach. And so I guess it could just really be summed up in being true to yourself. And I think that's, even if it's not about a particular type of or stylistic type of ministry, I would tell pastors that all across the country. If you want to reach people, be true to yourself. And if you're not true to yourself, you'll never be who you need to be, period. Whether that's a preacher or whether that's a country western singer who preaches, it doesn't matter.
What about, would there be anything that you would caution people about as far as maybe flack you've gotten from the church as a whole, or something they need to be aware about dealing with the MMA community, this type of ministry, anything that they need to understand before getting involved in this?
That's a pretty good question. I think that, as always, there's the temptation to get to lose ourselves in the midst of what we're doing. I watched a great movie called The Machine Gun Preacher, and it kind of resembles what we're talking about. And what was really interesting to me was he became the thing he hated in that movie. He lost sight of what God had called him to do at a point in that movie, and we all have the propensity towards that. And so we have to stay focused on what's first. And what's first is that to make sure we're glorifying God. I think what's second is to make sure we're true to ourselves. And if either of those two get out of whack, I think that we're going to be in trouble no matter what kind of ministry it is. And so you see this a lot in like the music industry even, really strong, squared away believing musicians who get in the limelight, and all of a sudden now they're getting doped up on coke and they're having orgies and they're doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And it's because that they got their priorities out of whack. It became all about them instead of being about God and what God's doing in them. And so my warning would be the same warning that I would give anybody that's going into ministry is keep Christ at the front and stay true to yourself. And if ever those two kind of get out of whack, man, it's going to be hell on wheels. It's guaranteed.
Yeah, protect your heart without a doubt. Have you ever had an experience? I know this is, again, it's a sport for you and I, but people from the outside, it's hard for them to wrap their brain about that. But the camaraderie that you experience, even with the guy that you face in the cage, even after a match, I've been in a situation where you fight somebody and you really earn respect for each other and sit down with each other afterwards, train together afterwards, go to eat dinner afterwards. And that's hard for some people to understand. Have you ever had a situation? Now, I know that you've impacted students, you've impacted soldiers, you've impacted things like that. But what about a fight? Have you got a particular story maybe? And you don't have to name a name, but that you gotten into a fight with a guy in a cage or a ring, and then afterwards you were able to have a discussion with him or go to dinner or and share your faith or answer questions for him or something?
Yeah, I've had quite a few actually. And so I was on the border of Texas fighting on this one card, and I won't mention names, but a short ways away, crossing the border, there was a town called Boys Town that did all kinds of debauchery. And so we were all sitting at Whataburger, man. I can remember it as clear as day. And they were talking about going and seeing some of these just filthy things. I mean, beyond like pornographic stuff. I mean, it was disgusting. And I just sat there for a while and I listened to them all and I go, hey, listen, guys, I got it. You may or may not be a believer. I don't know where you guys are. I don't really care. I said, but you don't have to be a Christian. You don't have to be a moral person to realize what you guys are talking about is absolutely screwed up. There is no man on the planet that should think about watching that kind of filth. And they all kind of stopped and looked at me and I was like, no, man, I'm serious. I can't even believe that you guys are having this conversation. So I don't know if they ever win or not, but it was a real opportunity to try to bring some light into it.
Sure. I watched the ABC Nightline piece today and prepping for this interview. And on that piece, there was a story of a fighter named Mike. He was a guy whose baby brother, I think, was murdered when they were kids. And I sat there, and I'm not going to front. I know you said earlier that you don't cry that much, and I don't either. But I watched that ABC piece today, man, and I cried. And I'll put the link to that piece in the show notes for anybody who wants to watch it. It was just a phenomenal, phenomenal story about a guy who's really rebelling against God, came to you for MMA training, had no intention on ever attending your church or receiving Christ, but yet he did. He found Christ, and it seems like his life has changed. And really, at the very end, it showed a piece of him standing in church on Sunday after his fight, and he's holding looked like his baby girl and just kissing his baby. And man, it was just phenomenal to see. You could tell his life had really been changed. Do you have any other stories that stand out in your mind that you are just in awe of what God did, or just reminds you of the importance of why you do what you do in your calling?
Yeah, I've got actually a lot. Most recent one took place a couple of weeks ago, and it really is amazing. So I have a guy that I've been training since the early 2002, maybe even a little bit before that. And he just PCS'd, and we promoted him before he PCS'd. He's been a great student, good friend. And in front of the students at his affiliate school that he goes to, he began talking about the importance of what's happened in his life and some things I didn't even know about. I knew that he is one of my other stories of where he got in a fight in Iraq and used combatives to save his life. So he began talking about his struggle with PTS or PTSD. I don't call it PTSD. I don't care what the medical definition is. It's not a disorder. It's the human body's way of dealing with the trauma of war. And some guys get it, some guys don't. And he began to talk about how his training with me and his love for MMA, his love for jiu-jitsu had really been a vehicle that God used to bring him out of PTSD. And that's probably one of my best stories. Right now, they're saying that there's roughly 300,000 to 400,000 soldiers that have been in Iraq or Afghanistan dealing with PTS. And I think that what I do is a gift from the Lord, and I see men on a daily basis fighting and training, and I listen to them, and I hear them say things like, "This is my therapy. This is how I get on with my life. This is how I resolve the internal conflicts." And I hear this enough, and for him to have said that, I didn't even know that he was struggling. Just kind of reaffirms to me the idea that I'm where I'm supposed to be, because God used something without me ever even opening my mouth that I do to help a guy get through some really horrible stuff that's happened in his life through war. And it was just an amazing night for me.
The concept behind this podcast, the Wrestling with God podcast, is that we kind of like to take on issues that may be challenging for some people, theologically, that is, and just be honest and have open conversations about it and seek truth out no matter where it leads. But would you say that there's been anything in your theology that has changed over the years, whether it be from 94 or even from 2000, since you graduated with a degree in theology? Has it been an evolving theology for you, or pretty much stayed the same, or anything that stands out in your mind that's really changed for you?
Not that it's really changed, but that it's become more solidified and has become the message of my life, really. So because I was a Satanist, I was heavy into drugs, heavy into alcohol, womanizing, all that kind of stuff. Just the idea of God's grace and that it's his grace that keeps us, not our works, has become a pretty repetitive message in my life. I've gone through some really bad stuff and talked with a lot of people that have gone through some really bad stuff. And no matter what way I try to frame things, I just seems like over the last 10, 15 years of my life, I keep coming back to it's about the grace of God. I've absolutely fallen in love with Pastor Tullian out of Coral Ridge, and his book, Jesus Plus Nothing Equals Everything. And it's a message of grace. It's a message of that we are hopelessly flawed, man. And God in his grace has chose to love us and to pour out his mercy on us and to gather us up. And, we blow it and we go back to him and we're like, hey, man, I'm such a knucklehead. And he goes, I died for you. Come on in. Come back. And I don't know, so it's not necessarily that my theology has changed. It's just the message of God's grace has become so real, so palatable. It's like you can chew on it forever. So I think that's probably been the most significant thing.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. Almost anybody that I talk to that has spent any amount of time in honest, heartfelt, transparent ministry, their depth and understanding of grace has just multiplied year after year after year. I think you have to, or you go crazy.
Yeah, no kidding.
I was a missionary in Brazil, and we used to say we actually had like 2 people on the staff that now in Brazil, if you've ever been committed for psychological issues, you actually do have a piece of paper that goes in your medical file. And so when we talk about being certifiably crazy, they actually have a certificate in their medical file that shows that at one point they were crazy. And we had 2 on staff before Christ that had actually received those certificates. So that used to be kind of a joke about our job interviews, is that you have to be certifiably crazy to come into ministry with us.
That's anybody, man. You have to be crazy to go into ministry. Period. Amen.
So you're part of a documentary, a fight film that is it out? Has it been released? Is it going to film festivals? What's going on with that project?
Okay, so the Fight Church film is finished filming. The last time I talked to them, I believe it's actually done with editing, and they're right now applying for film festivals. It's not available yet. The new trailer should be released sometime next month, but there was so much they had put the trailer out last year, and there was so much media attention over the trailer that they actually had to take it down because it was too soon. I'm really excited about it. I think it's a great opportunity for people to hear not only my heart, but some of the other guys that are on there, their heart. And the thing I love about it too is that they got people who don't agree with us. If I remember correctly, Greg Boyd is going to be on there with the dissenting opinion, talking about how he does not believe this is of God and that MMA has no place in the life of a Christian. And, so I'm really excited about it. It's going to be an awesome experience, I think.
Yeah, I can't wait to see it. Is there a website for that or anything? Or we'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, it's I think it's fightchurchfilm.com or maybe .tv. I'll look it up. I'll send it to you for sure. Okay,
and we'll confirm that and put it in the show notes. The show notes are going to be at grapplerschurch.tv/fighting preacher. That's grapplerschurch.tv/fighting preacher. We'll get all the show notes up on there as soon as this goes live. And where can people get a hold of you if they want to contact you and get some advice from you or just information from you or have you speak at their church or whatever? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
A couple of different ways. They can get me on Twitter or Facebook at Fighting Preacher. Twitter is Fighting Preach. Or they can go to my website, fightingpreacher.com. Those are the most easy way to get a hold of me. And it doesn't take much. You type in my name and you can find me pretty easy.
Well, John, that's about all the time we got today. I've taken more than I asked you for. I greatly appreciate you taking this interview on such short notice. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Maybe we can have you back on after Fight Film is released and get an update with you. But just in a way of parting, I know that there's going to be a lot of young men that are going to listen to this podcast because they're going to see your name on it. They're going to see you as Pride FC veteran. And I got a lot of friends like that on Twitter and Facebook and different things that run in my circle. And I know they typically may not listen to my podcast, even though they're my friends and they should. But when they see your name on it, I think a lot of them are going to jump on there. And maybe they're not religious. Maybe they haven't dabbled too much around with God. But any parting words of advice you'd like to speak into their life?
Regardless of where they're at, regardless of if you're a believer or a non-believer, if you hunger for truth, it will inevitably lead you to Jesus. It's just the way it is. And I would just tell the people out there that are listening, Christian or not, is just set your sights on attaining the truth. And as you start that search, it's a guarantee that God's going to show up in your life and he's going to reveal himself to you. And I'm just one of those guys where I try to keep things simple. If you just try to do the right things and you set your heart to do the right thing, God's going to meet you. It's not a works thing. It's not this is what you do to get saved. It's just putting your heart in a position to hear and receive from God. And even if you don't believe he's true, that's fine. Just set your heart on truth and God will show up in your life. And I think that the more that we do that and we turn our eyes towards searching for the truth, the more we find out the truth. And that truth is Jesus. And so I think that that's really the best advice I could give anybody is just set your eyes on the truth and God will show up. And if you don't mind, I'd like to say one more thing.
Yes, sir.
So I have a new endeavor in my life, and my niece is just turned 13. She has cystic fibrosis, and if you don't know what that is, it's a disease that over the last decades has caused children to not make it into their 20s. We're up to around the 30s now, where our medicine has advanced enough, and so I've joined a group of guys called More Than Just Me, and we're doing a project called More Than Just Mountains. And I'm going to be climbing the 7 summits trying to raise $1 million for cystic fibrosis and to find a cure for my niece. And pretty emotional about it. She's a great girl. And so if you guys are interested, you can check it out on my website and help me as I climb the 7 highest mountains on the 7 continents of the world.
Absolutely. You got our full support. I'll put that in the notes. Anything else we can do. And we'll have you back on, even if it's just short updates, man. I'll put you in different podcast episodes, and we definitely do anything we can to get behind that, John. That's awesome.
Excellent.
Be a real pleasure of ours.
All righty, man. Thanks for having me on. Anytime you want me.
I appreciate that, John. It's been a real pleasure. We'll talk to you again soon. Well, that's it for today's interview, Grapplers Church family. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I had a blast interviewing John. I will have all of Pastor John's information on the show notes page, which can be found at grapplerschurch.tv/fighting preacher, one word. Now listen, go and check out the link that we're going to provide on the project where he wants to raise money to find a cure for cystic fibrosis. And he's probably going to beat me up for telling you this, and I say that jokingly because he's such a violent man. We talked about that. He said in the interview he rarely cries, and we did this interview over Skype, and Pastor John left his video on, and forgive me, John, but when he talked about his niece having cystic fibrosis and his desire to find a cure, I could see the man's face, and the man teared up. And I'm telling you, if you could have seen him like I did, you would even know more how much this really means to him, how serious he is about it. And what if it was your niece? What if it was your child? And I just really hope that a lot of us listening will check the page out, that we will get involved, because honestly, together we can make a difference. And whenever I see a man this passionate about trying to do something and help somebody, I just really want to get behind it and make a difference. So won't you join me in that? And in other quick news, the gospel hip-hop artist K Drama, if you remember, of course you will, he was the first interview we actually had on the Wrestling with God podcast in episode number 2. His new album, Winds and Waves, drops September 24th. You can pre-order it now at k-dramamusic.com. So a couple singles I've already heard from his website and Cross Movement's website. Phenomenal album. I'm so excited it's coming out. So get behind that ministry, support it, and that's a way you can support the Wrestling with God podcast. Let them know that you heard about it here. Go over, get the album, give us some feedback on it, let us know, and we'll have him on again soon. Thank you so much. Until next time, Grapplers Church fam, grab a hold of God and don't let go.
And abroad. Some of the other things that are pretty noteworthy: in 2009, I resigned from Extreme, turned the reins over to Pastor Carlos Serrano, who has actually just recently changed the name to Grace Life Church. He's doing a great job. Love that guy, love what they're doing. And then have kind of been floating here and there. Stepped in to kind of help a church that was in trouble, which was at the time called Willow Bend, that we changed their name and kind of updated some things to Freedom Church. And just recently, they have merged with another larger church, and they're doing some great things as well. So kind of right now, I'm not in what most people would call full-time ministry, but I kind of think that the stuff I do with soldiers is full-time ministry. So.
You're a veteran yourself, are you not?
Yes, I served from 1993 to 1996 here at Fort Campbell. Did airborne school, ranger school, a bunch of other, smaller schools that aren't as noteworthy. Airborne school, air assault, those type of things. So yeah, I'm a veteran too.
Well, thank you for serving our country, sir, and thank you for the continued work with our troops. Hopefully you're providing them some tools that will keep them safe and bring them home. Have you ever had a story like that as a soldier ever came back and said, John, man, what you gave me saved my life on the field. I came back to my family because of what I learned here at class with you.
Actually, I've had more than just a few. Here at Fort Campbell, we have over 250 documented cases where soldiers have had to use the skills that I've taught them in combat. On this podcast to get the global exposure they deserve. Thank you again so much from the bottom of my heart. I am so grateful, so humbled, and I honestly just don't have the words. If you are a mixed martial arts fan, if you are a veteran, if you are a soldier, if you are a church planner, what else? If you hate cystic fibrosis, this podcast today is going to be for everybody. So if you have breath in your body, you are going to enjoy this interview. I guarantee it. And I won't keep you any longer from it, Grapplers Church fam. Let's grab a hold of God and not let go. You may have already seen our guest today via New York Times, NBC's Nightline, or The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. A self-proclaimed scrapper since childhood, Pastor John Renken now has over 68 professional mixed martial arts and boxing matches under his belt, many first-place titles spanning 3 different continents. He is a veteran of the Pride Fighting Championships in Japan, my all-time favorite sporting event, bar none. I believe he fought Akira Shoji in that bout. Is that correct? That is right.
All right. For those who don't recall that, or you're probably too young to remember, in 1994, this former Satanist found Christ, graduated from North Central University in 2000 with a degree in Bible and theology. Then he accepted his calling to develop a unique ministry by using his knowledge of MMA to lead others to Christ. In 2000, Pastor Renken planted Extreme Ministries and started his business, Clarksville MMA Academy, of which he is the head instructor. Pastor Wrestling with God, episode number 11.
Oh, I turn my headphones up, man. Take out your Bluetooth. We about to take it past the roof. Wrestling with God to find the truth. It's so mind-blowing and the facts are bulletproof. Tune in and connect direct, cause this sets demand respect. We ain't even tripping, the most intriguing podcast on iTunes. Flow with the word like a balloon. Oh, yeah.
Welcome back, and thank you for once again tuning into the Wrestling with God podcast. I am your host, Scott Blair, and we have a very exciting interview for you today. But before we get into that interview, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for making this podcast what I never imagined it could be, because you guys have taken the time to share it on your social media, to go and leave ratings on iTunes, and you subscribe to it. It has just been unbelievable, the things that are happening with it. Of course, I've said it before that we were number one on iTunes, new and noteworthy, for a lot of our first couple months. We've continued to stay in the What's Hot section of iTunes nonstop. But I was taking a closer look at the stats this week, and because last month we broke over 5,000 downloads, and it made me really curious about who was really listening to the podcast. And so I began to look into our host providers' feedback. I looked at the global map they provide for downloads. In fact, I'm looking at it right now. Sir, we are so stoked to have you today. Are you ready to wrestle with God?
I am ready. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Hey, before we get started, if there's anything that maybe I left out of that introduction that you'd like our audience to know about you, about your family, about your work, your ministry, go ahead and feel free to let us inside a little deeper into who you are and what you got going on.
Sure. One of the things that I do that, for whatever reason, when they wrote up my bio, never put on there, is I'm the head instructor here at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, where I train the U.S. Army and combatives. So I take all the skills that I've learned through years of fighting professionally in MMA and boxing and kickboxing, and I take those skills and I train. Roughly, we have 36,000 soldiers here at Fort Campbell, and I'm responsible for training them, coaching them when they go to tournaments, setting up tournaments for them to fight at, all the various aspects of combat when it deals with one-on-one stuff. So I do the stick and knife stuff with them, boxing, kickboxing, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, takedowns, all that stuff. And we actually have our own version of MMA. It's not quite MMA. There's no elbows and no knees to the head allowed, no twisting leg locks. But I take them and I set up these tournaments for them, or I take them to other posts that are doing these tournaments, and our soldiers get to actually try their skills in the kind of preparation stages before they go to combat. So they're going to get to test themselves against other soldiers who are training from all across the United States.
And whenever someone downloads from a country, it becomes a shade of blue. And by appearance, it looks like the podcast has been downloaded in almost every country on the planet. The whole map is almost blue. Now, looks can be deceiving, because if you get some downloads in large places like the U.S., Canada, Brazil, Mexico, India, Russia, China that I'm looking at, then that colors most of the map. But digging a little deeper, it appears by numbers that we have downloads in like 80-some countries. And there's something like, 190-some countries in the world. So I believe the podcast has reached about half of the countries in the world. We have listeners in countries that I know nothing about on the other side of the world, like Namibia and Burkina Faso. And Lord, I don't even know if I'm saying the names right. But I'm so deeply grateful that we are getting downloads everywhere, and in Islamic nations and war-torn nations and communist nations and nations where the gospel was still illegal and people were being persecuted for believing in Christ there. We've got hundreds of downloads in China alone, and these humbling facts have really fanned the fire for me in making sure that the content in the Wrestling with God podcast represents the body of Christ with our best effort. And if you haven't yet, would you please share this podcast via social media? Tweet it, Facebook it, however you want. Even if you had, share it again. And again, the very best thing you could do for us is to leave us a hopefully 5-star rating and a comment. Don't forget to comment on the iTunes review. And that allows all of the ministries represented on